They say you're too quiet, too intense, too much. You open your mouth to speak and the room goes still, not because you're wrong, but because you're different. You catch details no one else notices. You question the things everyone else seems to blindly accept. And little by little, people start to distance themselves. They laugh about things that bore you. They get caught up in drama trends, surface-level chatter. Meanwhile, you're stuck thinking about life-death purpose. You try to fit in, you smile at the right times, laugh when you're supposed to, but deep down you feel like a stranger in your own skin. And eventually, a quiet question starts to creep in. Is there something wrong with me? But what if the real problem isn't you? What if the world just isn't designed for people who think like you? There was a German philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer, and he had a brutal but fascinating idea. He believed that real intelligence, not academic smarts or high test scores, but deep, unfiltered awareness leads to isolation. The more deeply you think, the more alone you become. Not because people hate you, but because you make them uncomfortable. Most people don't want truth, they want comfort. And intelligent minds, they threaten that comfort. This video is about that brutal truth, about why society pushes away those who think too deeply, and why that emptiness you feel, that loneliness, might just be the clearest sign of your mind's depth. It usually begins early. You're in a classroom surrounded by other kids your age, but something feels off. Not because you think you're better, but because you feel detached. While the others are busy laughing at jokes, you're lost in thought. Wondering things like, why do people pretend to care about things they don't? Why do we say things we don't mean? Why does small talk feel like white noise? That's the first glimpse of a quiet burden, the kind that comes with a certain type of mind. Not the type that gets straight A's. Not the kind that gets trophies. But the kind that sees what others ignore. That feels emotions deeply. That questions everything, especially the things no one else is questioning. And as you get older, that disconnect doesn't go away. It grows. You start to pull back in conversations. You've learned the hard way that honesty tends to make people squirm. That asking why too many times ruins the mood. So you hold it in, you nod along, you smile, you play the role. Because every time you showed your true self, it didn't go well. People think you're arrogant. But really you're just tired. Tired of trying to explain a mind that doesn't fit the mold. Tired of watering yourself down just to be tolerated. You're not cold, you're just guarded. Because you've learned that depth scares people. So you hide it. You keep your observations to yourself. You silence your questions. You bury your pain. Not because you want to, but because you've been taught it's safer. And here's the contradiction: society claims to admire intelligence. We put geniuses on pedestals. We write books about them, make movies about them. But in real life, we push them to the edges. Why? Because true intelligence doesn't just fix problems. It questions the system itself. It breaks illusions. It sees the gaps in what we've been taught to believe. And that threatens people. You're too complicated for small talk, too curious to just go along, too aware to relax. And the emotional toll, it's heavy. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. You don't just want someone to hear you, you want someone to understand you. But that person never shows up. And so the question comes back, is there something wrong with me? That's the hidden tragedy. We live in a world that teaches smart people how to achieve, how to climb ladders, get degrees, make money. But it never teaches them how to exist when their minds don't work like everyone else's. So you adapt. You learn to camouflage. You dull your light so you don't blind anyone. You keep your thoughts to yourself because every time you've spoken up, you've been made to feel like a problem. But inside, there's a quiet sadness, a hunger for something real, a question. Am I the only one who feels this way? You're not. That pain you feel, it's not weakness. It's not brokenness. It's the signal of a mind that's too sharp, too sensitive, too awake to survive comfortably in a world that rewards conformity. Schopenhauer understood this. He didn't just write about it, he predicted it. He believed there's an unspoken rule that governs most of society. Don't think too much. Don't challenge the script. Don't rock the boat. Just go along. Stay in line. Say what's popular. Agree with whoever's the loudest. He called it the herd instinct. The way most people give up their own thoughts, not because they're dumb, but because independent thinking is dangerous. And that's why truly intelligent people are often feared, not because they're smarter, but because they refuse to join the herd. When someone starts asking why the group gets uncomfortable, when someone points out a contradiction or a lie or a blind tradition, the group gets defensive. It's not logic, it's survival. In every school office community, there's a silent rule: conform or be cast out. And people with sharp, curious minds, they can't help but break that rule. Not because they want to rebel, but because they need to understand. They need to know the truth. But here's the truth: no one talks about thinking differently isn't rewarded. It's punished. Because intelligence doesn't just challenge ideas, it challenges comfort. It disrupts the illusion that everything's fine, that the rules make sense, that the system is working. So when you speak up, when you point out something no one else sees, you don't get applause. You get silence. You get awkward glances. You get labeled too intense, too serious, not a team player. Take the workplace. We say we want innovation. We praise creativity in theory. But in practice, the people who point out broken systems are told to stop overthinking. The ones who don't play along with gossip or forced smiles, they're seen as antisocial. In schools, the same thing. The students who memorize the rules are rewarded. But the ones who ask too many questions, they're labeled as disruptive, not because they're wrong, but because they challenge authority. Even online, where free thinking is supposed to thrive, deep thoughts get buried. Algorithms push the loud, the angry, the simple, not the nuanced, not the thoughtful. So what happens? The truly intelligent learn to shrink, to stay quiet, to hide what makes them different. And over time, society gets exactly what it wants: muted brilliance, genius covered in self-doubt, potential buried beneath years of rejection. This is the great irony: we say we want intelligence, but only the kind that doesn't challenge us, only the kind that stays in its box. But real intelligence, the kind that doesn't fit in slogans or sound bites, that's messy, that's disruptive. It doesn't flatter egos, it confronts them. And that's why society quietly pushes it away. To be truly intelligent is to be misunderstood. Not because you're confusing, but because you're clear. Clear enough to see through the noise, to hear what's not being said, to notice what others ignore. And that level of clarity is threatening in a world addicted to comfort. You sit in a room full of people, and everyone's nodding along to something you know isn't true. Something that sounds good, looks good, but feels wrong. You feel the pressure to agree. But inside your mind is screaming, none of this makes sense. That's not just rejection. That's a kind of social exile. Because when you can see through the game, you stop playing it. And when you stop playing it, you stop belonging. That's the cost of not conforming. And for those who choose truth over comfort, who refuse to betray their own minds, it's a cost you pay every single day. But Schopenhauer believed there was meaning in that suffering. He saw intelligence not as a gift, but as a burden, one that only a few are strong enough to carry. He believed those who bear that weight must walk a lonelier path, but also a truer one. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't the kind of philosopher who painted life with sunshine. He didn't promise happiness or fulfillment. In fact, he believed life at its core was suffering, and that the more conscious you are, the more you feel it. To most, that sounds bleak. But to those who've lived it, the ones who've sat in rooms full of people and felt alone, it feels like the first honest thing anyone said. Born in 1788 in Germany, Schopenhauer grew up in a wealthy but emotionally distant household. His father was strict and rational, a merchant with no patience for feelings. His mother was famous in literary circles but disapproved of her son's dark worldview. From a young age, Schopenhauer felt like an outsider. He didn't just observe life, he analyzed it, watched it, questioned it. Always at a distance, always searching for something real. And that's exactly how his philosophy took shape. His most famous idea, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. To Schopenhauer, intelligence leads to isolation, not because smart people want to be alone, but because deep understanding creates emotional distance. The more you see the world for what it is, the harder it is to feel connected to those who live only on the surface. At the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy is a concept he called the will. It's not a rational force. It's not even conscious. It's just this blind, relentless drive that powers all of life. A kind of primal urge, always wanting, always chasing, never satisfied. In his view, most people are ruled by this will. They pursue money, power, status, validation, not because they've thought it through, but because they're trapped in a cycle of craving they don't even recognize. But truly intelligent people, the thinkers, the feelers, the observers, they see the trap. They step outside of it. They start to detach from the constant chase. And that's when the suffering begins. Because once you've seen the illusion, you can't unsee it. You can't laugh at the same jokes. You can't join in on the same conversations. You can't pretend it all makes sense when it doesn't. It's like walking through a party where everyone's dancing to a song you can't hear. Schopenhauer put it like this: the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In other words, ignorance isn't just bliss, it's belonging. Once you start asking deeper questions about meaning, about morality, about mortality, you step outside the tribe. Not because anyone kicks you out, but because no one understands you anymore. And Schopenhauer didn't hate society for this. He just understood it. He believed society and solitude serve two totally different purposes. Society keeps you entertained. Solitude makes you real. Eventually, truly intelligent people crave something that the world simply doesn't offer: silence, clarity, authenticity. That's why Schopenhauer praised solitude not as loneliness, but as liberation. Great men are like eagles, he wrote, and build their nests on some lofty solitude. To him, intelligence wasn't glamorous. It wasn't something to celebrate with awards or recognition. It was a kind of curse, one that strips away comfort, tears down illusions, and forces you to face reality without the filters. But he didn't stop there. Schopenhauer believed that through that suffering you could reach something higher. Not happiness, but wisdom. He believed that if you took your pain and turned it into insight, if you transformed your alienation into clarity, then that suffering wasn't wasted. It was sacred. He was one of the only philosophers who looked at the kind of pain most people bury deep inside and said, "Yes, that's real. That's valid. You're not imagining it. The loneliness. It's not in your head. The sense that something is wrong with the world, that you don't belong, that everyone else seems content with things that feel empty to you. That's not you being broken. That's you being awake." And that's why his work still speaks to people centuries later, especially those who feel out of place, who sit in meetings, classrooms, family dinners surrounded by words, but starving for meaning. For Schopenhauer, suffering wasn't a flaw. It was a sign that you see, that you feel, that you know too much to be at peace in a shallow world. Modern psychology is finally catching up. A 2016 study in the British Journal of Psychology found something that lines up with Schopenhauer's view almost perfectly. The more intelligent a person is, the less satisfaction they tend to get from frequent socializing. For most people, being around friends boosts happiness. But for people with high intelligence, too much social interaction actually leads to frustration, overstimulation, emptiness, because the conversations often feel flat, predictable, repetitive. There's no room for nuance, no space for deeper questions. It all feels like noise. These individuals may care deeply about people, but they struggle to find connection in the forms that society offers. This leads to a specific kind of loneliness. Not the kind where you're physically alone, but the kind where you're surrounded by people who don't think like you. And that's even lonelier, because you're not just missing company, you're missing resonance. It's like speaking a different emotional language and realizing no one else understands the words. On one hand, highly intelligent people are deeply introspective. They reflect, they analyze, they feel things at a level that's hard to describe. But on the other hand, they're human. They still crave closeness. They want to be seen, not just admired, but understood. To find someone who hears not just what they say, but what they mean. And that's the trap. The smarter you are, the harder it is to find someone who can understand the weight of your mind, the complexity of your emotions, the chaos of your thoughts. This isn't arrogance. It's neuroscience. Psychologist Dr. Thomas Suddendorf, a leading expert in cognitive evolution, explains that our brains evolved for tribal living, for fitting in, surviving in tight-knit groups of about 150 people. Our intelligence was designed to solve practical problems within those groups, not to contemplate abstract truths or question societal structures. But today, highly intelligent individuals operate in a completely different environment. They think faster. They process information in layers. They challenge norms. They spot contradictions. They live in a world their brains were never wired for, and the mismatch hurts. Their thoughts don't just run deep. They run fast in multiple directions, often at once. They notice micro-expressions in a conversation and wonder what's being left unsaid. They replay a sentence for hours, dissecting every word. This level of sensitivity isn't a superpower, it's a weight. And that weight often leads to emotional exhaustion, anxiety, depression, burnout, not because the world is actively cruel, but because it's not equipped to meet them where they are. One study from Harvard found that intellectually gifted children often feel more alienated and report greater existential worry than their peers. Even as kids, they realize they're different. But instead of being celebrated, they're told to tone it down. Why do you always ask so many questions? Why can't you just go with the flow? Stop thinking so much. And eventually those words sink in. They begin to wonder if their curiosity is a curse, if maybe there really is something wrong with them. so they build emotional walls, not to shut others out, but to protect a depth that's been hurt too many times. Even in romantic relationships, this shows up. Highly intelligent individuals often come across as distant, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. They've learned that most people fall in love with the idea of intelligence, not the real thing. The overthinking, the introspection, the emotional intensity. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski described this experience as overexcitability. It's a trait found in many gifted individuals, heightened sensitivity across 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, imaginational, sensory, and psychomotor. In simple terms, they feel more, think more, and suffer more. And while this intensity can fuel creativity, insight, and compassion, it also deepens the distance between them and the world around them. But here's the secret no one talks about. Loneliness doesn't always mean something is missing. Sometimes it means something is unmatched. A mind that sees through illusions. A heart that refuses to settle for shallow connections. A soul that seeks meaning over comfort. Such a person will always feel a little out of place, not because they've failed socially, but because they're wired for something rare. And in a society obsessed with fitting in, that rarity can feel like a flaw. But it's not. It's a signal. You might assume that intelligence brings admiration, and at first it often does. People are drawn to clarity, to confidence, to insight. But admiration has a darker twin: envy. And envy doesn't look like anger. It looks like withdrawal, dismissal, quiet resentment. Most people won't admit it, not even to themselves, but intelligence can trigger insecurity. When you speak clearly, when your thoughts have depth, when you question things, others accept. People don't just hear your words, they hear their own inadequacy. It's not your fault. It's their ego trying to protect itself. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in, a cognitive bias, where people with lower ability tend to overestimate their competence. They don't know what they don't know. So when someone intelligent enters the room, it shatters their illusion of understanding. And that can sting. Not everyone wants to confront their limits. So instead they lash out. You get called arrogant, cold, thinks they're better than everyone, even when you've never said that. Even when you're just being yourself. That's because intelligence doesn't just challenge facts, it challenges identities. And that makes it a social threat. We evolved in tribes where acceptance meant survival. Standing out, thinking differently, that was risky. So when someone intelligent disrupts the group dynamic, it triggers ancient instincts. This person is dangerous. Cast them out. This isn't just theory, it's history. Socrates was executed not for being wrong, but for asking too many questions. Galileo was placed under house arrest not because of bad science, but because he challenged the church. Tesla died broke and forgotten. Alan Turing helped end World War II and was later chemically castrated for being gay. These weren't just tragedies. They were examples of what happens when truth threatens comfort, when brilliance disturbs the illusion, and it's still happening. Innovators get sidelined in meetings. Thinkers get shadow banned not just online, but in real life. Students who think differently are called troublemakers. Employees who raise real problems are labeled not a team player. Why? Because intelligence without conformity disrupts the script. And that's unforgivable in a world that values comfort over clarity, simplicity over nuance, consensus over truth. So what do you do? What do you do when the thing that sets you apart also isolates you? Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't say, just be yourself and people will understand. He gave a much harder, more liberating answer: solitude. He wrote that intellectual superiority is often marked by a deep need for solitude, not because isolation is fun, but because it's freeing. Because when you're alone, you don't have to shrink yourself. You don't have to perform. You don't have to trade clarity for comfort. In a world terrified of being alone, Schopenhauer saw solitude as power. He flipped the script. Where most people chase likes, followers' approval, he said, the one who can be alone and still feel whole, that is the strongest kind of person. Because solitude isn't loneliness. Loneliness is craving connection and not finding it. Solitude is choosing peace over noise. It's not the absence of people, it's the presence of yourself. Schopenhauer believed that great ideas, art, science, philosophy, aren't born in crowds. They're born in stillness. He spent most of his life in quiet reflection. He wasn't famous in his time. He wasn't celebrated. But he understood something timeless. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. Because true freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want. It's the ability to think, to feel, to exist, without needing the world's permission. And here's the shift that happens when you embrace solitude. You stop needing validation. You stop explaining your depth. You stop apologizing for your intensity. You start becoming the person you were always meant to be, not who the world told you to be. And in that stillness, something amazing happens. You start to see. You notice patterns others miss. You find beauty in silence. You find strength in your sensitivity. You stop chasing belonging and start belonging to yourself. That's what Schopenhauer called the noble intellect. Not noble by birth, but by richness of mind. Not elevated by status, but by depth. And it's not a path for everyone. Most people will avoid it because solitude requires something terrifying, facing yourself. But if you're willing to do that, if you can sit with your thoughts, your fears, your truths, then solitude becomes your sanctuary. Not because it makes you better than others, but because it makes you real. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong, if your thoughts are too heavy, your questions too big, your emotions too much, you are not broken. You are not too much. You are simply more aware. And yes, that comes with a cost: loneliness, misunderstanding, rejection. But that pain, it's not a flaw. It's your signal. It means you see what others don't. You feel what others suppress. You think what others won't dare to consider. And that is your strength. Let others walk away. Let the world mislabel you. Let the crowd misunderstand. Because the truth is, you are not lost. You are just ahead of your time. And in time, others might catch up, or they might not. But you will already be free.